Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to conservation and careful management of the state's forests to make them more resilient and better habitats for wildlife. ChooseWood.com.
Really what we're talking about are community-based traditions. Martin Bergen, he was a cowboy poet, but he was also a saddle maker. He had worked out west as a young man quite a bit. There's a rhythm guitarist down in Ava, Missouri by the name of Albie Dooms, and he's been backing fiddlers in that area for years and years. You know, I don't think he'd be able to live without old-time music, but I also know he wouldn't be able to live without being able to go fishing as well. So,
I'm Sarah Fensky. This is St. Louis on the Air. With everything going on in the world these days, you could be forgiven for not realizing that this is the year of Missouri's Bicentennial. Yes, the state is 200 years old this August, and to celebrate it, the Missouri Folk Arts Program is offering 200 stories related to our state's folk arts and traditions. They include brief profiles of Missouri artists, both famous and not, and some really catchy music, like this tune from the great jazz violinist and guitarist Claude Fiddler Williams. And that was Claude Fiddler Williams at the fiddle. And joining us now to explain more about these 200 stories, which his story is a part of, is Lisa Higgins. She's the Missouri Folk Arts Program Director. Lisa, welcome.
thank you, Sarah.
So, Lisa, I understand the Missouri Folk Arts Program goes back to the nation's bicentennial. That was in 1976. How did that help bring this program into being?
Yeah, the nation's bicentennial really spurred a lot of national interest in the folk and traditional arts. They were incorporated into celebrations in Washington, D.C., and that also was the impetus for the National Endowment for the Arts to really establish folk and traditional arts program and staff within their organization there to take the lead across the nation.
So what do you see as your mission with this program?
Our mission is I'd say the core part is to build cross-cultural understanding. The activity part is to identify and to document and to present traditional artists and working to sustain those with them, hand in hand, to sustain those traditions for the future.
So when you say folk arts and when this program thinks about folk arts, what is included within that?
Well, it's actually pretty multidisciplinary. I would say a lot of people hear folk arts and they might think of heritage things, lost arts, things that actually maybe don't happen anymore, or they think of folk music and they might think of someone like the Indigo Girls, or even Woody Guthrie's a little bit closer. But really what we're talking about are community-based traditions, things that are vital to the community, that are passed down from person to person or handed back and forth from person to person. I use a little metaphor that folk arts are arts with a genealogy. So when we talk to people, one of the first things we ask them is two things. Where did you learn the tradition, and from whom did you learn that tradition? So on Friday, a St. Louis who lived in Kirkwood, Besta Johnson, a really talented old-time fiddler player from northern Missouri originally. She passed away on Friday. Mm-hmm. And when you would ask her that question, she would tell you about being a little girl and playing her up in Lynn County in northwest Missouri, and hearing both of her parents and many family members play music and going to dances and playing her first dance when she was 7 years old.
So if she was playing that same kind of music, but she had learned it, say, from a private instructor or from a class at school, would that not necessarily then be a folk art?
Well, you know, all boundaries can get kind of muddy. There certainly are people, you played Claude Fiddler Williams, for instance, and some of the jazz artists in Kansas City, a lot of maybe not the first generation so much, those guys on the street corners and who founded the Union at Mutual Musician Foundation, But some of the second generation guys, they began to institute that Kansas City jazz style in the public schools and also in the colleges. So some of them were still swapping tunes. Well, they were all still swapping tunes and playing together informally after gigs at the Mutual Musician Foundation into the wee hours of the morning. But some of them also were maybe learning theory and in the classroom as well.
So it still counts.
It can, yeah, absolutely.
I noticed some of these other arts that you're talking about here. I was intrigued by some of these saddle making, quilt making, in one case even chair making. Is there a difference between visual folk arts and just craft making?
I'd say you have to think about something being grounded in community. So the saddle maker, we'll use another St. Louis person since we're on St. Louis Public Radio. Another someone that we lost fairly recently is Martin Bergen. He was a cowboy poet, but he was also a saddle maker. He had worked out west as a young man quite a bit, and in different states on the range, and had learned these traditions. And obviously saddle making, that's an occupation. I don't know if it's obvious, but it's an occupational tradition. You could see how integral that would be to the work that they would do, and something that he learned on the job, if you will, and perfected over the years, and expanded his repertoire, and was actually quite sought after and had quite the waiting list for his saddles.
Lisa, you've mentioned now a few people that we've recently lost. Are these kind of traditional arts and folk arts, are they in some danger of maybe not being passed down?
I think there's always some danger of change. Change to the good and change to the bad. The thing that I'm trained as a folklorist, and that we know is that traditions are dynamic, and they might not necessarily die out completely. They could potentially be revived. I think Missouri fiddling would be a great example of something that has waxed and waned. There was a great revival of traditional fiddle music in the 70s and 80s. I think there was just a New York Times article a few weeks ago about a weekly gathering down in McClurg, Missouri, and talking. A lot of people took from that once these fellows, the older fellows, died, that would be gone. But really, there are young people who come to that weekly gathering. People in their 20s, 30s. I've seen children playing music there. I think that there's definitely an inclination in the community to keep it going. I think we have a lot more things competing sometimes with the traditional arts, but so many of the folks who are vested in their community and in their traditions, they're really pretty actively working to share that. And to keep it going in one way or the other.
And so they're sharing it with people in the community, maybe with children or grandchildren, but you're sharing it with a much broader audience. Tell us about the idea behind these 200 stories.
Well, we started talking with Michael Sweeney, who is the Bicentennial coordinator for the State Historical Society of Missouri, back in 2017, actually. And he and I would get together for coffee periodically when he was driving through Columbia. He's visited all of the counties and, of course, the city in the state. And we would shoot ideas back and forth. And over the years, I've been trying to think, what will Missouri Folk Arts Program be doing for the Bicentennial? So we've provided some advice for some folks. We're working on documenting some legends in the state. But our and we're also working with Michael and the Bicentennial Committee to hopefully have some live entertainment in August. But I'll let them reveal that once that gets set in stone.
So it sounds like, while this is not going to be the only part of this was in motion long before the pandemic, this part of it with the 200 stories. This is almost the perfect pandemic way to celebrate.
It really is. We wanted to try to tell, last year was the 35th anniversary of Missouri's Traditional Arts Apprenticeship Program. And that's a teaching opportunity for a team of master artists and apprentice. Many of those artists that you mentioned, the reason we're featuring them is that we have so many of them that we've known over the years, these master artists in particular. And so last year, the 35th, the hope was to tell 35 stories. We didn't get the funding to do that in the way I wanted to, and so with the pandemic, as you say, we sort of shifted the idea to 200 stories for the 200th year of the state.
So
we're able to address their theme is past, present, and future, and that just fits so incredibly well with traditional arts.
So you were looking for a much smaller thing. You ended up not getting funding, and now you've gone all out. Do you have the funding to make this all something that feels doable?
One of the things that we really needed was time, actually. Not a lot of money, but we were able to actually connect with an undergraduate student worker in the English department here at Mizzou. And Taylor started working, and she and I brainstormed via Zoom back in November. She was hired. She took all these ideas that I had in my head, and she actually mapped out the whole year based on a spreadsheet that I gave her and some conversations. And then I wanted that fresh eye of the next generation, really, to kind of look at some of these stories that I knew are already out there, either stories that we've told at Missouri Folk Arts and that are on our website, or that might be like Claude Silver Williams. There's some wonderful programs about him with CBS Sunday Morning and Charles Corral, years and years ago, and wanted to see what piqued her interest. And so she'll pick a link, she'll draft a short bit of the profile, and then I try to expand on that. But she really does a good job mapping that out. And then she'll get the stories ready about a month ahead of time, and we'll get them plugged in.
Okay. And so you've now got 36 of these up. You can see them on our website. We've got a link. We're at stopublicradio.org. Yeah. And so it sounds like, though, you have the entire year mapped out at this point?
Yes. Yes, there's a little flexibility in there. When Taylor and I first talked, and she sort of went away with a spreadsheet, she came back and she said, we could just tell 196 stories. But I also wanted to share stories about some community organizations like the Boonslick Area Tourism Council, the Sugar Creek Fair and Festival Board that puts on the Slavic Festival in the fall, and some other organizations like that actually present folk and traditional arts, and usually are community grounded. So it's the community, sort of putting that tradition back out to share with others. So, and most of those are funded by the Missouri Arts Council as well. So that's a good way to also make people aware of the funding that's available for folk and traditional arts.
Because they do give out grants for people working in these genres.
Absolutely.
So in terms of these ones that you have up now, it's really enjoyable to look through these. One of the ones
Thank you.
Yeah, I think you and your undergrad have done great work here.
Tailored, yes.
So one of the ones that really struck me, and I might be mispronouncing this name, this is Mulu Wani. He's a master core drummer. He taught a style traditional to the Kuku people of South Sudan. How do the traditions of immigrants fit into Missouri folk arts?
I think that it's really been clear to my predecessors. I started in this position about 21 years ago, but worked with some of my predecessors and know some of them. And actually, if you follow us on Facebook, sometimes the previous directors will comment on a story. They may have been the photographer of the photo or something like that. But what's interesting is that some of our predecessors, really as soon as the second or third year of the apprenticeship program, connected with some resettlement organizations. Like, again, we'll go to St. Louis. You have the International Institute there that's been active for over 100 years to help immigrants and refugees, newcomers to get settled in St. Louis and Missouri, to get driver's license and jobs and perfect their English. But they also come with these traditions that are so vital to them, connect them back home. And so we've been introduced to them through people who work with International Institute in Kansas City with the Kuku, South Sudanese with some. They have a national organization and a regional arm there in Kansas City, Greater Kansas City, and it's just a matter of sometimes word of mouth, a little bit of field work, and driving and visiting people, do a little internet research to connect with people, but always really connecting in the ideal situation, face to face, to meet the artist or the liaisons who might, be able to do some cultural interpretation for us and provide entree to those communities.
I was also struck by a story about the, quote, old-time fiddler. This is Taylor McBain, and his little profile noted that he worked as a truck driver, a coal miner, he was an electrician all the way up to his retirement. Are most of these folk artists doing it for the love and not as a full-time career?
I would say the vast majority of them, that these traditions are core to their being, but are not necessarily their full-time jobs. Fiddler Williams was a performing artist. He played music. He toured as a young man and well into really up until his last days. But most, as you said, with Taylor McBain, those are great examples. There's a rhythm guitarist down in Ava, Missouri by the name of Albie Dooms, and he's been backing fiddlers in that area for years and years. He was featured in that New York Times article. He was a school bus driver, and he repairs instruments, has a great collection of them himself, and has had a number of jobs. I don't think he'd be able to live without old-time music, but I also know he wouldn't be able to live without being able to go fishing as well. So, those are just things that are really key to who he is. And I think, there's another guy, H.K. Sylvie, another old-time fiddler. He worked for, one of the big air players.
I'm sorry, I can't help you with that one. Yeah.
No, that's okay. Boeing, I think. And was actually instrumental in helping people get to the moon in his work.
Wow.
That's the other thing is that I think sometimes people think of traditional artists as sort of, we have those ideas of folklore and folk tales as being about the peasants and the folk. And they are everyday people. A friend of a mentor called them everyday citizens of genius. So they're kind of regular folks who have regular jobs, which could be anything from truck driving and mining and school bus driving to radiology professor and a engineer and all kinds of those things. And some of them are employed full time.
Well, we hope people will check out these stories. There's just such a wealth to these lives and so much vibrancy to these portraits. And, there's also links where you can listen to some of this music. And so hopefully people will check this out and learn more about the breadth of folk arts in our state. Lisa Higgins, I want to thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, I enjoyed it. Thanks so much for inviting me to come and tell the story, this one story about our 200 stories.
And Lisa, again, is the program director for the Missouri Folk Arts Program. We do have a link to those stories on our website. That's stlpublicradio.org. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to conservation and careful management of the state's forests to make them more resilient and better habitats for wildlife. ChooseWood.com.